If your only experience with the Separatist Droid Army is through watching the prequels and the Clone Wars TV show, you'll probably see these droids as robotic servants with very little personality and life behind those photoreceptors. And I don't blame you. The Separatist droids, especially the B1 and B2 units, seem to march into fire like eager cannon fodder. Even the more advanced models like the IG-100 Magna Guards and the Commando droids, with their extremely robust combat and tactical abilities, still seem sterile and cold, but more because of their efficiency rather than some type of personality they exhibit. But that's really because droids are made out of metal, and us organics were used to deciphering facial expressions, maybe posture, and so it's really easy to miss those minute details that droids give us that might indicate there's something else going on in their neural processors. As a matter of fact, these Separatist droids are not only intelligent, many units have the ability to develop emotions such as satisfaction for a job well done, arrogance and overconfidence in their own abilities, fear and sadness upon witnessing their comrades' deaths, and also seeing their own impending doom. Because of a droid's robust computing power, in some ways they're much deeper thinkers than human beings and other organics. In the novelization of Rogue One, we're given a glimpse of just how complicated a droid brain is when we're placed inside of K2SO's mind during his last stand near the archive room on Scarif. The droid heroically gave his life to protect his friend and Master Cassian Andor by holding off a seemingly never-ending stream of stormtroopers. It was his Thermopylae Pass, his Ganner Rysod moment. In this sequence, K2SO is hit multiple times with blaster shots and is forced to reroute some of his more vital systems and energy system to other parts of his body. One shot hits a usually non-vital area of his body, but it's now extremely important because he's rerouted all of his vital functions through this area, causes catastrophic damage. K2SO actually has time to pause and think about the irony of this situation, and at the same time he realizes he has only 12 seconds left to live. At that moment, he began making several calculations about his chances of survival. He figures out 89 different scenarios in which he can extend his own life, anywhere from 0.8 milliseconds to an additional 43 days. But a secondary calculation made him realize that all 89 of these scenarios led to the capture or execution of Cassian and Jyn Erso. That was unacceptable to K2SO, so he would make further calculations factoring in the mission parameters and how Jyn and Cassian could still receive the data of the Death Star and escape. Unfortunately, K2SO found this almost statistically impossible, at which point he reshifts his calculations and focuses only on mission success, even if Cassian and Jyn perish. K2SO at this point understands that Cassian Andor is going to die, yet he still denies himself the opportunity to mourn or reflect on their friendship. He calculates all of this within just 3 seconds because he has a computer brain. And now with 9 seconds left, K2SO uses a large amount of energy to say the following.
Climb! Climb!
K2SO would spend the next 6 seconds coming up with a plan for Cassian and Jyn Erso to successfully complete the mission.
You can still send the plans to the fleet. If they open the shield gate, you can broadcast from the tower. Locking the vault door now.
K2SO would then seal the door by shooting the console with a blaster. With his last second of life, he runs an improbable simulation in which Cassian Andor survives. It was his last guilty pleasure. If only his rigid, metallic face could smile. This is what I mean when I say that humans can't really understand how complicated droid thought is. If we're judging the Separatist droids only by their facial expressions and movements, we're missing like 99% of their thoughts and feelings. And when you do see some sign of life, when a Separatist B1 battle droid cries in fear, what you're actually seeing is an emotion so strong that it triggers a physical reaction, which is quite rare. Now, if you start paying attention to the droids a bit closer, looking at their behavior, how they interact with one another, you'll begin to see the Separatist Droid Army as not just a large mass of metal, but as a complicated society of different droids with different personalities and preferences. There's even signs of tension, envy, hatred, awe, similar emotions that humans have when they're in large groups towards one another. There's an entire droid society within the Separatist Army. Take the Droidicos, for instance, also known as the Destroyer Droids. They tended to hang out in small packs together, and generally didn't like interacting much with other droids. This mainly is because they were built by a separate manufacturer known as Colicoid Creations Nest. Colicoids were terrifying carnivorous and murderous insect aliens. They had very little personality, and they built the Droidicas in their image. The Colicoids believed that all of the Bactoid Armor Workshop products were inferior. We're talking about the B-1 battle droids, the B-2 battle droids, and a lot of the other droids used by the Separatists. And so as a result, they would build the Droidicas. Now, there wasn't outright hostility between Droidicas and Bactoid droids or anything like that, but they were definitely different and hung out in different spaces because of their programming and design. One droid known as RO-GR, or Roger, is a unit we'll be referencing a lot because he fought in every conflict from the Battle of Naboo throughout the Clone Wars, and would later even fight against the Empire with the Rebellion and with the Resistance against the First Order. He'd been slashed by Jedi, blown up by stormtroopers, and been deactivated and reactivated multiple times, and he provides us with one of the most valuable insights on the Separatist Droid Army. He's one of the few B-1 battle droids who have lived such a long time and also kept records in his own memoirs. Roger had stated that he viewed the Droidicas as superior machines and recognized and was envious of the Droidicas' more robust parts and weapons. But like their makers, their single-minded focus on killing things made them not the most interesting droids to interact with. It is theorized that they might not even have the capability of personality imprinting, which happens to other droids when they go on long enough without a memory wipe. I do have a theory that Droidicas are able to communicate better and recognize other Colicoid creation nest droids, like the terrifying Pistioica Sabotage Droids or Buzz Droids, the very dangerous Tri-Droid Fighter, and the massive Scorpneck Annihilator Droid. It's possible that these droids get along with each other because they have a very similar murderous and very straightforward type of programming. As we've talked about in previous videos, the same thing that makes droids effective and autonomous combatants should also give them the ability to develop a personality of some kind. Now, B-1 battle droids like Roger probably view Droidicas in a more positive light, despite the inability to communicate with them, very well. Primarily because they proved to be one of the only droids that could really force the Jedi to retreat in one-on-one combat. B-1 battle droids were usually pretty helpless in most combat situations, but also usually were put in NCO leadership positions. They are known to have worked alongside and even directed Droidicas in battle. Although again, because the Droidicas lack a higher ability to communicate, it's possible that the B-1 battle droids treated the Droidicas more like pets or animals rather than equals in the way they communicated with them. Roger also mentioned being envious of the capabilities of the IG-100 Magna Guards, which isn't surprising at all because these were amongst some of the most elite droids employed by the Separatist Army. Built by Holowan Mechanicals, this is the same lab that created the infamous IG-88 series. Now, the IG-100 was specially designed and requested by Count Dooku himself. He wanted these droids to mimic the look and size of the Kalish warriors who used to fight alongside General Grievous back when he was more organic. Now, legends say that when Grievous first was introduced to these Magna Guards, he destroyed all of them in a fit of rage. He saw these droids as a perversion. I mean, they were created in the image of his dead friends, and he also was still getting used to his own cybernetic body, which, continued to cause him a lot of pain. But eventually, he realized he could make these IG-100 just as deadly as the Jedi he would surely face and have to hunt down. The IG-100 Magna Guards would be taught in the 7 classic lightsaber techniques. Of course, General Grievous never held back in sparring, and he taught the Magna Guards to have pride in their wounds and scrapes, as it made them more intimidating to their enemies. This means the IG-100s had a warrior-like mentality, which is kind of strange for a droid, but definitely changes their personality greatly. Combine that with their primary directive, which is to protect General Grievous at all costs, it made them very elitist when encountering other droids. Now, the IG-100s understood their own value, they understood how important their mission was, so it's very possible that they would become quite arrogant, especially towards other lesser droids. Although Roger doesn't really mention that, he's too busy fanboying over their, mechanical parts and such. If B-1 battle droids did have beef with any other droids within the Separatist Army, it was definitely the B-2 battle droids, which Roger disliked and saw as completely unnecessary. These super battle droids were more focused and ruthless than their B-1 counterparts. They also had more armor and firepower and deeper voice emulators. But like the Droidicas, they were quite single-minded and would oftentimes even toss B-1 battle droids out of their way. You can also theorize that maybe some of these B-2 battle droids did it on purpose. This single-mindedness made them less useful in the long run, as we see on Placer 15, where the B-2 super battle droids were relegated to manual labor because of their brute strength. But it was ultimately the more sociable and flexible B-1 battle droids that would be their manager and, in a way, protector.
You should have left them alone.
Now, Roger took great comfort in the fact that most B-2 super battle droids were decommissioned after the war, whereas many B-1 battle droids would find further work and have a second career after being a soldier. This could be just because B-1 battle droids were very numerous and you could find them everywhere and they were very cheap to buy. It could also be because the B-1 battle droids were a bit more flexible and easier to reprogram to do other things. Remember, it was the B-1 battle droids that drove the ATT tanks, crewed the Separatist starships and bridges. It was the B-1 battle droids that commanded as well. Or maybe it's because the B-1 battle droid's mundane nature. I mean, if a B-2 battle droid or a droidica gets out of control, it's quite dangerous. If a B-1 battle droid goes out of control, you can kind of just knock them over and you'll be fine. Or maybe it's because of the B-1 battle droid's pettiness. I mean, taking joy in another group of droids being decommissioned is a pretty shitty behavior, and shitty behavior is usually a sign of intelligence. Aside from the tactical droids, it's possible that the B-1 battle droids were amongst the most intelligent and probably the most emotional droids in the Separatist Droid Army as well. Although this could also point to just a lack of maintenance. Since the B-1 battle droids were pretty much thrown into battle as cannon fodder, it's very likely the Separatist military didn't have the resources to memory wipe them on a regular schedule, which is what creates personality imprinting in the first place. Speaking of tactical droids, Roger also hated them the most because they were unable to fight at all, but still were willing to send battle droids into extremely dangerous situations to die, oftentimes using very terrible and predictable strategies. Roger also correctly points out one of the major flaws that the tactical droids have, which is arrogance and selfishness. It's interesting that Roger has this kind of rebellious thought, and I'm pretty sure a lot of his other brethren also thought this way as well. Now, I'm pretty sure that programming or something like a restraining bolt didn't allow the droids to disobey orders, but at least the thought process is there. And, you know, if the Republic military was a bit more open-minded in seeing the droids as individuals, they could have exploited this aspect of, you know, their programming. In the same way that the Confederacy exploited individuals like Ponkrell or Sergeant Slick. So there you have it, guys. That is the crazy world of the Separatist Droid Army. As you can see, there were a lot of different social groups and different personalities within this army, even though they are all mechanical beings. As always, it's important to never judge a book by its cover, and, you know, don't use human notions to judge non-human entities.